Hi, I'm Jonathan, and welcome to First Last Everything, a podcast where I chat to guests about their relationship to technology through their first love, last obsessions, and the piece of tech that meant everything to them. Each item a guest brings to the show could be anything from a piece of software to a computer to a weird gadget to that first camera. Pretty much anything goes. This time I'm joined by Joe Rosensteel. Joe is a VFX artist who has worked on big-name Hollywood productions as well as smaller commercial projects. He's a writer on his own blog and for the Six Colors website, and he also has a podcast with Dan Sturm called Defocused. We recorded this interview earlier this year, and so Joe's last pick has been superseded. But after discussing this with Joe, we've kept this interview as is. Joe hasn't updated the device, and it serves as a nice little time capsule that is interesting to compare to today. So, First Last Everything with Joe Rosensteel. Let's go. Joe, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So this podcast is about people's relationships to technology. So how would you describe your relationship with tech? Is it, would you say it's a good one?
Ups and downs. Glass half empty, maybe. I have many positive associations, but also some negative ones. And you can't have the good without the bad, I guess. So it's that's how I would describe it. It's just kind of like nothing's perfect. But you kind of do derive benefits from a little bit of everything, I think.
Yeah, that's a fair sum up. So something before we get started on your picks, something I'm really keen to know more about, being a big film fan myself, is your work as a VFX artist. How did you initially get into that line of work?
Well, I was inspired by the visual effects that I was seeing in the 80s and 90s. You have, of course, Star Wars, and even what they were doing for Star Trek: The Next Generation on TV seemed impressive at the time. There was an episode of Reading Rainbow, which I don't know if that ever aired in the UK, but it was a show where LeVar Burton, who played Geordie LaForge on the show, he would talk about book stuff most of the time, but in that one particular episode, he went behind the scenes on how they made Star Trek: The Next Generation, and they had a whole bit about how they did the visual effects, where they talked to I think Rob Legato and some other of the visual effects luminaries. And so I found that inspirational. And at the time, it seemed to be a good career to get into, as more so than it became, I guess. So I went to school for computer animation, and graduated, and then I started working on feature films for Sony Pictures ImageWorks, which is their in-house visual effects team, um, and worked for them for many years on many projects. And then I worked for a company that did television visual effects, episodic, because there was an expansion of uh, they needed higher quality visual effects for TV shows that looked more like film, because people had HD TVs instead of just like standard definition. Then of course we moved into 4K, UHD, so you needed higher fidelity visual effects work to be done for those things.
What sort of year was that?
2012, I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
And then with streaming, that came along a little bit after that. Of course, streaming had existed, but the push for 4K prestige shows and streaming, where
Mm-hmm.
there's like a continuing story and stuff. So you'd basically be delivering almost like a movie that was many hours long, because they'd want it all in one big chunk, as opposed to you deliver something every week.
Yeah.
So that was interesting in and of itself. And then more recently, I'm doing commercial visual effects, which I had never done before. And that's a different experience, where things just kinda, like, come up and go away real fast because,
Yeah.
client needs something, it's delivered, and then that's it, and it's just like, "Okay, well, we're done, I guess," and then next thing.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to pick you up on something you said there. You said that it seemed like a good area to go into. More, these things said more so than it maybe turned out to be. What do you mean by that?
Well, a couple of things. The At the time, in the late 90s, early 2000s, there just weren't enough visual effects artists to get work done, and so there was a premium paid for doing that kind of work. And then there were more people who were entering the field, and the pace that things needed to go and the amount of work that needed to be done increased dramatically. So you would often be working a lot of overtime hours and things, and so your life outside of work might not be very good in the, let's say, late 2000s. But the situation also changed because there's no union for visual effects. Well, no viable union. I think there are a couple places where people have union membership
Yeah,
because
yeah,
of like animation things, but whatever. But the big point here is that the these studios were able to say like, "Hey, we have all this labor that needs to be done, and we would like to do it more in a more cost-effective manner." And so they would take advantage of tax incentives that would be available abroad, and they would try to move the work to take advantage of those tax incentives, um, on a sometimes per movie basis or for a longer run than that, and that became a challenge if you didn't wanna move around, and then after that, you got into, the sort of, with television that kind of also happened with, that being mostly centered in Los Angeles because of quick turnaround times at the time. But then gradually it had the same effect as the movie industry, where cheaper labor was the priority. So that it's not great. It's not terrible, but like I'm fine. It just seemed like a way better idea back before
yeah.
you had you know tax incentives to move places or
Mm,
that kind of stuff. It just and I'm not. Bitter or anything about it. I don't wanna
no.
make it sound like that, but it's just, it was, more challenging than it was at the outset.
Yeah, sure. Do you I think what gets talked a fair bit in VFX is that crunch. There's a lot of crunch going on. A lot of like heavy pressure work to turn over work quickly for big productions. Tight deadlines. I guess that's something you've encountered then. Do you have you managed to sort of now steer away from that a bit more with commercial work?
Yeah, the the thing with crunch, it's that overtime thing I was talking about. Uh, Things that are operating on a longer schedule, um, can fall victim to it more often than things that are operating on a shorter schedule.
Mm,
Because with a shorter schedule, people can see where the end is, and with a longer schedule, producers are sometimes have different ideas about how much work they can get done quickly. And a lot of it hinges on people making final choices. So sometimes you're doing a lot of work that doesn't end up in the final product. Um,
yeah,
and that's a different conversation, but it's basically like you can the amount of work that goes into something is not like one to one to what you see on the screen, and the longer period of time that you have to fiddle with something, the more of that work that you're doing is not evident anywhere. So that is something that I found to be true in all of the things that I've worked on over the years, and any of the places that I've worked. And it's not the fault of the people running those places. It's more often the fault of the directors and producers on the client
yeah,
side, where they don't have
yeah,
like a realistic vision of what they want to achieve. And some of that, they explore through the process of making things and then breaking them apart and then making them over again.
Mm.
But, yeah, that's kinda what I mean by that, and, you know, crunching over time is just, like, a lot of work that just happens, because the schedule gets out of control. Mhm.
So I think it's time for your first pick, which is the first piece of tech that really made an impression on you. What have you got for us?
Well, the first thing that made an impression on me was, the Mac Plus that my, grandfather got for my mom so that she could do some work at home, because they were using Macs in the marketing department that she worked in the early '90s. That kind of thing wouldn't really like, they would all be on PCs today, but, the Mac Plus, she could open up her Word files on it. It had I believe it's the HD20 SCSI hard drive, which was an enormous block that sat underneath that little foot pedestal of the Mac Plus, and it had a ridiculously loud fan and hard drive inside of it. Um, and the machine itself had a ridiculously loud floppy drive and fan inside of it. So you just hear this thing clicking away and the fan spinning as it
Yeah.
chugged along trying to load things. But I got my first real experience with technology using that, and kind of the power of what it could do. Because before that, I had used, I think it was like a PC compatible DOS thing with like an EGA monitor or something. And even though it had color, it didn't have any uh, like power or anything inspirational about it. Like it
Yeah.
didn't achieve anything. Like you couldn't really, there weren't programs that I was running on it that could do anything. But of course, I was a kid, so I wasn't like programming anything myself. But the experience of using the Mac Plus was great because you could take this application that was on something as small as a 3.5-inch floppy drive and put it on the computer, run stuff from the disk, save files to the disk, and put them in like there was like one of those little uh almost like a Rolodex or Filofax or whatever, like one of those cases where you could just sort of like
Yeah.
sort through all
Yeah.
of the different floppy drives and all the different colors that the floppies came in.
Yeah. I remember those.
And yeah, and I could pick out like games like Stunt Copter, where
Oh
it
God, I
it
remember
was a
that one.
you do? Okay. No, most people
Yeah.
don't remember Stunt Copter. I loved Stunt
I
Copter.
do remember that. Yeah. I remember having a
Yeah.
demo of that, I think, at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, it just the poor guy just splatting on the ground, when you tried to drop him into that, cart with the hay. But the Stunt Copter, like, there was, ClarisWorks 2.0, that I could use to do school projects on, and it had gradients in
Mm.
it. They were black and white gradients that were dithered, of course, because it was a Mac Plus screen. So it was just interesting. And then, of course, my mom got a printer for that, and that was the Style Writer 2. And that thing
Wow.
could chug away, being one of the early inkjets. I think it was a Canon underneath the hood, but it would print out exactly what I had done in ClarisWorks, on the page and with a smoother gradient. And you could turn in stuff for school projects and things. And so it just felt like you had a lot of power and opportunity, and not to mention HyperCard, which uh, felt like you were creating applications in a way that was much easier to get my head around than anything like basic programming or anything like that, where I could actually just move things on the screen and see what was happening. So in a more design sense. So yeah, that's really what made a first impression on me, was just that computer and everything that could go into it, and out of it. It just was capable of being a really good publishing machine, I guess.
I did some looking up about some sort of facts about the Mac Plus. It was released. It was the third Macintosh, and it was released by Apple in 1986. And it actually didn't come with a fan as a standard. And it wasn't until I think the next Macintosh that maybe fans were sort of a default. So there was sort of loads of third-party fans that you could get to sort of add on to this Mac Plus, because it was a bit of an issue. Like, it would overheat quite frequently. So I don't know if that maybe was added on already onto your Mac Plus, if you were saying about the fan.
Now, Maybe I'm misremembering the sound of that HD20 then, because it was so loud. But yeah, I know that my grandfather had upgraded the RAM for my mom, but I don't think he didn't have one of those external fans that I've seen where it was
Mm,
like clipped onto the top where the heat vent is, where the handle is. Like I've seen that on YouTube channels. So maybe the machine itself didn't have a fan as much as the HD20 did.
do you know what happened to it?
I think my mom got rid of it when she moved, because it wasn't really worth anything at the time. Just sad. There were other Macs that I had at the time too that I was just like, oh, just sell them, like, or just
Yeah.
donate them. They're not even worth money, like blah blah blah. But now I have some regrets because those are
Yes.
all collector's items. Because I had her next machine was a Quadra 605 that she had. And that was the first machine we used on the internet. Then we had the Quadra 700 that I bought off of eBay for like I want to say $100 or something at the time, which is ridiculous now. You can't
Mm.
even get those things for that. And then there was like a Performa 630 something, like one of the junk ones, but it had a CD-ROM drive, so yeah.
As a VFX artist, what are you using on sort of a day-to-day basis as a VFX artist? Are you on like a Linux machine? I'm sort of imagining how you maybe switch. Do you have sort of two modes, the sort of the work mode and then the sort of outside of work mode, where your head sort of goes into two different spaces? Because I imagine if you're working on Linux using VFX software, it's a very different experience than, you know, on a Mac or playing around on your iPad. It's a different mindset. Would that be correct in assuming?
Uh, yes and no. So when I started ImageWorks, we would use a Linux machine. I think it was CentOS at the time, and uh, the software package for compositing was something proprietary that they had called Bonsai, and it was ugly and terrible to use, and I hated it because I had used Shake prior to that when I was at school, and that was on Mac and Linux and PC at the time, but then Apple got rid of the PC support in an effort to drive people to the Mac. Because the whole reason why they bought it is they thought they would sell a bunch of pro workstations, and that didn't materialize. But they couldn't get rid of the Linux version because everyone was using that, and then it would kill the software. So instead, they just kind of like let it peter out over time. But later on, ImageWorks got some Shake licenses when it was petering out. So that's what I used for like Watchmen, was a Shake composited show, and then we had another compositing package that was developed in house that was supposed to be the replacement for that, which was also supposed to handle 3D scenes called Katana. And then Sony sold that to Foundry, who makes Nuke. And since they already make a 2D compositing package, they ripped out all the 2D stuff that was inside of it. And so it became uh, just a 3D asset thing for lighting and that stuff. So I've used all of that software, but Nuke then became the software that I would use for compositing, and that continues to this day. Nuke is a very powerful node-based compositing package, and it has many similarities with Shake, but it is not exactly the same thing. So for anyone unfamiliar that's listening, it's like a flow chart basically that you are processing data that goes from upstream to downstream, and so you can have many inputs that feed into one output. You can have one input that feeds to many outputs, and how the data flows through that flow chart is what determines what happens, what processes are applied to the data. And so that is very easy for me to wrap my head around. And because that software package, Nuke, is the same no matter what you're running it on, Windows or Linux or Mac OS. Um, the only thing that changes are hotkeys, which that's the one thing that flubs me. 'Cause it just you've got your command, your option, and your control, and then on Windows and on PCs, you've got the Windows key or the super key with
Yeah.
Linux, and so you kind of can mess up some of those operations the first time you try to execute it, but then you kind of get into a rhythm. And on uh, let's see, when I moved to doing work from home during the pandemic, because we hadn't done that prior to that ever, because all the work we were doing was considered too sensitive, that we would all be leaking all of this precious information.
Yeah.
And it's like nobody wanted to do that. They just wanted to work from home. But I mean, I'm sure there are people who like to leak information because there always are, but it was not the priority for anyone. But uh, the thing about working from home was that you would have a remote desktop software package. And so all of the work that happened inside that window would be with your Windows or your Linux commands, and then everything else was still my Mac. So that helped isolate the work and the modes for me a little bit more. Although if I was copying text in my Mac's window, and then I went back over to the PC window and then tried to copy some text, I would always hit Command C
Yeah.
instead of Control C, because it just was just how that was going to go. But that was primarily what caused that to be a little distracting. And then I was able to use Carabiner to change the key order on my PC, so that I could make mistakes less often. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's fine. And I actually prefer that to running Nuke natively on my machine, which I've done since I've done commercial stuff. Because when I'm running Nuke on my own machine, then I'm using all the native Mac stuff, and it's fine, but I lose out on the ability to just throw my whole workspace somewhere else, because it was all in a virtual desktop environment before.
Yeah.
And I'm also using my computer's processor, and so things like playing music or whatever can start to get all choppy. So it was nice to compartmentalize in that way. And because I use two desktop monitors, I can have a full screen desktop that is my, the remote work, and then I can use all the other Mac stuff. And there are many um, ways, gestures, and stuff that you can control your multiple desktop monitors that are full screen, that I find very beneficial. Like I've got a Logitech MX mouse, and if you hold down your thumb on that little like thumb pad area, you can just sort of swipe the whole thing away, and reveal your Mac desktop underneath,
Hmm.
um, and then swipe back again by pressing down on that. So it just is um, much easier for me to work in a place where I can just throw all of the work stuff away for a second, and then bring all of it back to where it's supposed to be, than when I'm trying to like interleave it with other Mac programs that are running.
Do you ever think the Mac could conceivably be a platform for sort of heavy VFX work? I mean, that was obvious with the acquisition of Shake years ago, which I'll put a link to this in the show notes. So you did a really good article for Six Colors about this, and if people are curious as to what Shake looked like, you did a whole YouTube video about it. And there's so many bevels on those buttons. They went crazy. But that was their kind of idea, that maybe the Mac could become a place for doing VFX work, and it just never really worked out, and I don't think it really happens anymore. Correct? And do you think that's just never going to happen now? We're just going to sticking to Linux.
I think it's never going to happen, but not because of the Mac software. I think it's never going to happen because of the Mac hardware. The demands for Mac hardware are different from the demands for visual effects stuff, and but one of the big ones is storage and RAM, and the Mac hardware has never had cheap storage and cheap RAM, and it has it's not going
Yeah.
in that direction right now for
No. No.
sure. There's no aftermarket upgrades now, so it doesn't make any sense. But I know for commercials that there are people who use Macs. My friend Dan Sturm, who works for Sandwich, which I've worked for them doing commercials. They use Macs, and easy, all of like all their workflows and everything's it's just done with Mac, and because Dan and everybody else there knows how to use Macs, everything goes smoothly. And so he's able to use, Nuke for Mac. And when I was working for them, I've used Nuke on my machine for Mac OS and done the work there. And there is no penalty for doing that other than the machine you're running it on isn't going to be as powerful dollar for dollar as a Windows or a Linux machine would be,
Yeah.
just because of that money thing. And I think Quinn Nelson did a video about the pricing on um, the Mac Mini and how the cheapest configuration, there's just no way you can build a PC for that low
Yeah.
end introductory Mac Mini. But there's also like if you change anything about it, there's no you quickly get into a situation where yes, you absolutely can build a cheaper PC than the Mac Mini, and that's just always going to be the case. And like the machines that we would use to do compositing, like not even like the lighting work, but just compositing, they would be these huge towers that had enormous graphics cards and everything
Mm.
inside of them, and tons of RAM because you're trying to load all these images, large images, because you're working with frames instead of trying to decode a video stream. You'd have like what like let's say you have a 16 megabyte frame, single image, and then you
Mm.
have that times 24, and then you have that's just 1 second, and then so you'd say you've got a 3 second spot. You can quickly like multiply that up, and you can start to fill up your RAM, and you're opening multiple shots at the same time, doing multiple operations on those frames. So you RAM and storage space were always a priority, and speed of storage space. So like everything just kind of adds up, and so that's why I think the
Yeah.
Mac can't compete in that arena. If you are able to do your work more efficiently on a smaller scale, and you're not relying on like a render farm and like servers somewhere and everything, then you can absolutely do that, like what Sandwich does. But yeah, for like ILM or something, they're not gonna move to a Mac, to do their work.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, and yeah, I never really, of all the reasons, I thought maybe that why VFX might have become a thing on the Mac. I'd never really considered that price point being mainly the issue, one of the main issues. But so that's quite interesting. So I think it's time for your second pick, and this is the latest piece of tech that you are really enjoying. Can you tell me about that?
It's gonna be a real snooze, because I'm just picking my iPhone 16 Pro, and I feel like that's a cop out, but hear me out. I had an iPhone 13 Pro,
Oh
before
well, there you
this.
go.
Yeah, and so I know everybody who upgrades year over year is kind of like, they just added another button, whatever. But it's like the difference is much larger to me, coming from a 13 Pro. So that's why it's really the current tech that I'm enjoying, and but the last thing that I purchased, and it is way more powerful, but also I found the photo situation very interesting, because I like to take a lot of photos. Like not everything is artsy, but I like that when I'm trying to take an artsy photo, that it doesn't feel like it gets in the way as much as it used to, because we've got the ability to control the tone mapping now with the tone control. We have
Mm.
the exposure compensation seems to work better than it did before. Uh, Although I wish it would stop resetting every time the phone gets bumped a little bit. But the camera control button is still very bad, and I don't like it. It
Yeah,
has
agreed.
not. It Yeah, it has not appealed to me at all. I don't understand. And then Tim Cook had that Wired interview he did with Stephen Levy, where uh, he was asked about the camera control, and that is a kind of, and he's just like, oh yeah, people love buttons for taking they love their photos or whatever, and it's just like, oh, that's not it's not the thing, because it
Yeah.
also doesn't work like any button I've had on any of my cameras ever. So I don't know, it has not won me over, and the only times I've used it, I've accidentally used it. Like I accidentally switched the photo style to vibrant, and I would never want it on vibrant, but then all of these photos were in vibrant, and I was like, what happened? But fortunately, another great thing about it is that I can go back in and change the photo style after the fact, so I can fix the fact that those were all vibrant, which is huge, and you can't do that on any other iPhone right now, although I'm sure it's gonna come to the base model next year, uh,
Sure.
as these things often do, but it'll be
You
way
can't
less
do it on any
exciting
other
then.
phone either. I think that's the interesting that you
No.
can't do it on any other phone. I think that's why. I mean, it's completely changed the way I take photos because I was taking way too many raw shots because I just thought, well, I do a raw, then I can like make it how I want it to look like rather than what Apple's post processing is going to mess around with it. But now I can, I can change it after the fact, and it's not a massive raw file each time, and it means I can take lots of rapid pictures. But other than that, yeah, I agree. It's not really useful, is it? Or it's too sensitive. Yeah,
It's too sensitive. There are too many things in it, and it is too easy to accidentally do something you didn't mean to, in any of those modes because there's so many of them. But yeah, that for me, um, like exposure lock, would be nice to have in there. I think they're supposed to have it in the 18.2 or whatever beta, but I don't run the betas on my phone, so I don't know if
mm,
that is coming along with the focus lock. But that kind of situation where um, everything else that I would want to control with it is better controlled through the phone interface
yeah,
overlays, and but to take it back to the positives, I really enjoy having
yes,
the ability to adjust the photo styles and the tone mapping and etc. after the fact, and the fact that the phone can do that, this camera system in the phone can do that is great. And like you said, I would take photos with the raw, but it would have to be a thing where I would have to think about doing it, and
mm,
so you'd have to while you're preparing to do it, the moment might have passed that you were
yeah,
going to take a photo of. And also, I found that sometimes the raw output could be a little weird in terms of when you'd go to edit it afterwards. Some kind of unusual things might happen with the highlights. At least whenever I've tried to use it in the past, that it didn't seem to perform like my camera raws, or the raws from my cameras, I guess I should
mm,
say. Um, so I don't know. And like you said, much larger file, and slower, to process and do anything with. Um, and if you tried to like upload that to social media, sometimes it would if the system wasn't deft in dealing with like downsizing that before it tried to send it away, it'd be like, forget it.
no.
But yeah, it just overall is a much better phone. And connectivity is better. Everything about it is better. So I really appreciate having it.
So we've discussed your work as a VFX artist by day, but you also have your hands in other pies, fingers, cursors. I don't know. Like you're
Hmm.
doing other things. Let's just say.
Well, it's great because I love pie.
I mean, who doesn't love pie? Pie is good.
There are people who are always talking about cake. Pie over cake for me. Thank you.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Hmm.
I'll take both if it's possible to have both. I'll have both. Going back to what I was saying, you do lots of other little things. So you have your blog. You write reasonably regularly for Six Colors. You have a podcast where you talk about movies and tech. Um, so I guess like is moving from like your heavy duty sort of daily software, your VFX work, to like writing about other software. Is that kind of like an easy transition for you? Is it kind of a business pleasure thing, or would you say it's more about it's like a maybe even like a type of therapy where you're sort of because a lot of your work tends to be opinion based sort of writing, which and I really enjoy it. It's just it feels very much like you're getting your feelings out there. Would you say that's maybe correct?
Yeah. I am not qualified to do like stats reviews of like how machines perform compared to other machines in a
Yeah.
category, like, so I don't write anything along those lines, and I don't do general breaking news coverage of like paraphrasing something that someone else had just published just happened. So I
Yeah.
generally just write an opinion that I've had. And when I'm really busy with the work that earns me income, I cannot do that often. So there are long gaps in the publishing schedule that I have on my personal blog,
Mm.
because if I'm too busy to write something and the moment passes, I can't keep writing about it. And so I have a lot of abandoned drafts and things. Also, if someone else writes something or podcasts about something that I would have said, then I'm just like, well, just go look at that one, because like
Yeah.
I don't need to do that. Like saying the same thing in a slightly different way that's more, like with me tones, like doesn't benefit anyone. But yeah, I do find it kind of, I don't know if I'd say therapeutic, but it lets me stretch different creative muscles than I would during my day job, because I don't write for my day job.
Mm.
Um, Other than, please check out this email that has this thing, and like look at this shot or whatever. Like I don't, there's no storytelling narrative that occurs. Um, and so I do find that to be a release. And then with the podcast that I do with my friend Dan, um, that is uh, something that is really, I, don't- it is really fun to do, because we are talking about stuff that's related to our jobs in a way, because we generally will wind up talking about the visual effects that are in that movie. But we more often are talking about how we feel about the construction of the movie overall, and that's stuff that we don't deal with in our day-to-day um, kind of thing, because he doesn't really work in movies generally, and he doesn't do anything really beyond visual effects for that. And same for me, I don't do anything beyond visual effects when I've worked on movies. So it's kind of fun to play like armchair quarterback of like, how did the rest of this go? And we generally will spin out and talk about stuff that is wholly unrelated to the topic. Like we just talked about pies.
Yeah.
And it's just fun. And so, it doesn't always have to be a very serious discussion. And I would say that the other thing that I do beyond both of those, the writing and the uh, podcasting, is I like photography as a hobby. I'm not good at it where I'm gonna have like a gallery show anywhere, and I don't generally publish a lot of photography stuff, but I like the act of going and taking photos. So I find doing that to be therapeutic in a different kind of way, because it's visual instead of writing, but it is also using a different part of my brain than when I'm doing visual effects, because I'm sort of mainly just training a composition area, like focusing on composing a shot and trying to capture what's happening currently, as opposed to trying to edit what had already happened. So I find that that is also something that I like to do for creativity reasons, and some of that informs what I end up writing about occasionally. Um, like sometimes the topics that I've written about for Six Colors or something like that, because Jason Snell and Dan Morin, who write almost everything at Six Colors, they have the bases covered when it comes to breaking news. Like, so I'm not
Mm.
writing news when I write for them. I write an opinion piece, and so it's generally about me using something, a piece of software or the camera stuff, and so like that lets me cover something that they don't normally talk about on the blog, but it is Apple related, and so that kind of thing, I find to be valuable to get myself out of just being in a rut with just work stuff.
Yeah. So it's very much an outlet for you then.
So, would you say that this podcast is an outlet for you from your work?
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. This podcast is an outlet for me. My my work at MacStories is an outlet, and it's and I guess we're both in a similar situation. You are a creative, creating creative things. VFX. I'm a graphic designer, and I'm creating brands and things like that. And that's we're both sort of doing the similar sort of creative day job, but we also both seem to have a big like a passion for technology and like how it can change our lives or improve it, or sometimes maybe make it worse. And that it's good to have that outlet of being able to think, oh, I want to write about this thing. And certainly my wife doesn't want to sit and listen to 20 minutes of me talking about some bit of some new piece of software. So it's good to write about that sort of thing. And it's also in this podcast as well. So I am very fascinated by people's relationships to technology, whether they're good and bad, and how they fit into people's lives, rather than just about technology, because the relationship between people and technology is just very interesting, and I think it's always evolving. We'll be back to find out Joe's everything pick in just a minute, but this is the part of the show where we take a break to take a look into the past to talk about a piece of technology that you may not have heard of. Weird, ahead of its time, an abject failure or success. Whatever it was certainly something. Apple's place within the gaming world is a tale as old as time, or at least that's what it feels like. The debate today focuses on games on its existing platforms like iOS, iPadOS, macOS and tvOS. But back in 1996, Apple went full tilt at the gaming market with the Pippin. The Pippin, named after the Newton Pippin Apple, which is in turn a relative of the Macintosh Apple, was a games console made for so much more than playing games. It was planned to be more as an entertainment hub for the family. It came with built-in internet connectivity, a VGA port for connecting a monitor, support for multi-region games and more. These features on their own were a step above the Sony PlayStation and Sega Saturn, but Apple's approach to the system was pretty revolutionary and miles away from their walled garden style of today. That's because the Apple Pippin was an open standard that companies could license from Apple to make their own versions. As long as they stuck to Apple's design rules, third parties could change or update many aspects such as AV capabilities and even the design of the device itself. The Pippin helped enable this by not having a system pre-installed, although it did come with a full installer disk containing system software based on the Macintosh OS of the time, System 7. Apple teamed up with Bandai to make the Pippin, with Bandai focusing on the case design and marketing. In fact, it was actually Bandai who originally had the idea for the Pippin, approaching Apple in 1994 to pitch a version of the Macintosh purely for CD-ROM games. So it was really more Bandai's idea than Apple's, which was reflected in the way Apple stayed relatively quiet about the product. It hoped to make around $20 for each device and was more interested in the idea of spreading the struggling Macintosh system further. But the Apple Pippin was a colossal failure. By the time it was released, the market was dominated by PlayStation 1, Sega Saturn, and the just-released Nintendo 64. It didn't have many games available either and cost about twice the price of its competitors. It didn't have dedicated sound or video processors and only supported QuickTime video. And then there was the controller. Shaped like a small boomerang, it was very uncomfortable to use and had a trackball in the center that worked poorly. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, the Pippin was already on its way out, but Jobs' cancellation of the so-called Mac clones sealed its fate. Looking back, the Pippin was a disaster, but interestingly it foreshadows Apple's current day debate about attracting games producers while balancing the expectations of its devices, which aim to do many things for many different people. So with that, I think we'll move on to your final choice. You've got a really interesting one here. This is your everything pick. So this is the piece of tech that means, or meant, in this case potentially, meant everything to you. What have you got?
All right. And the emphasis really needs to be on meant, because I haven't used this in years. So Twitter was a big deal for me, and it has lasting effects in my current life on the friendships and other relationships that I have, and how I even use other social networks to this day. So it was a big deal, but it is bad and it sucks. So I don't think anybody should use that in its current incarnation as X, and I don't think anybody should have been on it the past couple years. But whatever. The thing with Twitter that made it good at the time, way back when, was you could have these interactions that were not about outrage and being upset over things. They could just be silly conversations you were having.
Yeah.
If you were following someone, you could also learn about people. You'd kind of interact with the people that also followed them, that they would repost or retweet, and you would talk to them too. And so you kind of build a friendship that way with other people. And so that's how I met Dan Sturm, my podcast co-host and friend, and some of my other friends. And you just kind of like interact through this other kind of interaction that kind of like builds over time, and then you're just like, oh, I guess we're friends now. Like I don't know when the point happened that we became friends, but it was because we were talking on Twitter, because we both interacted with the famous podcaster Merlin Mann, and
Yeah.
neither Dan nor I are best friends with Merlin, but we are best friends with each other because we were talking in this kind of space that just happened to be created. And that kind of thing was, I don't know if that exists really in any of the current social networks that have evolved over time, because they're all kind of modeled on late stage Twitter of, you know, more political takes and stuff, and then the reactions to that. So I don't know if people still kind of make those friendships. I don't have any new ones that I've really made over
Mm.
that time period since I've moved to Mastodon. And that is honestly the one that I use. I have a Threads account, and I set up a Blue Sky account when everyone's just like, "Oh no, everyone's on Blue Sky now," and I was just like, "Okay, fine." But then somebody took my name, so well, not my name, but they took the name that I would have used.
The username,
So
yeah.
I yeah, so I just have a username occupying space over there for the time being, that is similar but not the same, just in case something got worse and I have to be like Joe Steele 182777189 or something awful. But
Catchy.
yeah, it's just it just happens when things get popular. But I've got things for, and I've checked in a little, seen what people are talking about in those places, but I don't feel the need to have my conversation with the world broken apart into multiple places at the time. So it's all happening on Mastodon.
I mean, it's funny you say about building relationships online with people, and you haven't really done that on Mastodon. I never really made any friendships on Twitter, but actually on Mastodon I have made several friendships. And actually that's kind of how I ended up at MacStories in a way, and met some people through that. So I guess it just depends on maybe how engaged you are in the various platforms. Maybe you say you don't really go on Mastodon as much as you did when Twitter was
No, I would say I probably right now I'm going on about as much. Initially, when I first moved to Mastodon, I didn't go on as much because there wasn't there wasn't anyone there. Not that there's a ton of people on Mastodon right now, but there's enough where you can have interactions with people where you can hit refresh and there's a new message for you to see or something. And I don't
yeah.
reply to every message that comes out. That's kind of unhinged. But I look at what is happening, and so I find that kind of interaction good, even though I'm not doing anything with that information most of the time when I'm seeing things. But yeah, I have many avenues to talk to my friend Dan, or my friend Rye, or my friend Austin, or whatever. Like Mastodon is coincidentally one of them, but I have other people that I can interact with through Mastodon that I am more like acquaintances with, I guess I would say, instead
Hmm.
of like friends. But, maybe that changes over time too, because, I've only really been seriously committed to it for 2 years, and people who have joined less than that, probably, I would say. So it takes time to build up any kind of thing, especially when people are, going different spots. Like you mentioned Todd Vaziri. I'm friends with Todd from Twitter too, and he is on every social media platform. Um,
Yeah, he's very active.
yeah, everyone can be friends with Todd if you try.
Yeah. Don't everyone message Todd right now. That's just to be clear. We don't want to. Don't everyone message him trying to be friends with him all at once. That might be a bit overwhelming. But yeah,
No, no, and you can't want it too bad. You
yeah.
gotta,
Play it cool, guys. Come on.
yeah, and play it cool. But yeah, it's, but I don't know. That's why I would say that Twitter was an everything thing because, um, and another way that Mastodon isn't is because you could even find out information about forest fires, or you'd find out information
Mm,
about breaking news about things, and there are toxic bad sides of that. Like we saw whenever there's a mass shooting in the United States, which is unfortunately very often, you'd always see those posts making the rounds of like, don't just retweet whatever it is that you see because wait till things are fact checked, blah, blah, blah. Whenever a disaster occurs, you could be spreading misinformation by accident. The person might not be informed, or the information might change over time. And Twitter never got a grasp on that. And Mastodon doesn't have a grasp on it either. It just doesn't happen there. So it is an advantage in that sense, but you also lose out on any kind of like news elements that you might really expect to see. Um, and if you look hard enough, you can find people that are like posting about news things that they're upset about. I found there's no shortage of that on any social media platform,
mm,
but uh, it isn't the same thing as like an informative piece of information from like a local government entity
yeah.
or civic authority, which are not on Mastodon and are barely touching threads at the moment, and definitely not on Blue Sky. So yeah, I kind of miss having that because I wouldn't have to follow those entities, those government entities. I could just like go to their Twitter page and see if they had posted recently and what the information was. Um, because God, you'd go nuts following all of those civic whatever accounts that were posting about terrible things happening. But
Yeah,
you
that would be good for
just
your mental health.
no, but you were kind of glad that they existed because it gave them a place to put their updates about an ongoing event. Let's say like a forest fire or something like that. Like, is it spreading? Like, is it dying off? Like, what's happening? Um, or a hurricane or something like that. But that kind of information, you can still get at. It just is kind of like a slower trickle as it makes its way to like a local news site and
Mm,
stuff like that. So it's not minute to minute or whatever and direct from the, LA Fire Department or whatever entity is posting about it. But that was something else where it became an everything because you just could see everything that you
yeah.
needed to see from it. But I don't know if your experience was different or if you found replacements for that since moving away from Twitter. But that's one where I'm like, it would be nice to have more frequent updates that I could go look at if I needed them from entities posting those kinds of updates, but I don't need them, so I don't feel like I'm missing them on Mastodon.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Yeah, those things would be nice to have for some things, but yeah, I don't feel like I'm missing it. I also feel like moving away from Twitter when I did and moving to somewhere like Mastodon, it feels a little bit more, should we say, peaceful on
Mm,
Mastodon, and
yes.
having that linear timeline where you're seeing everything in order and not being pushed to see various things that are trending or whatever. It feels very much like when I come in and look at it, that's what's going on right now, rather than something that happened yesterday that everyone's talking about. Like, I want to see what people are talking about right now, rather than reliving things. Do you think that thinking about back to Twitter in the early days, I wonder if this is a rose tinted glasses situation where it feels like everything social media nowadays is, should we say, a harsher environment than it was back in the day? Or do you think that's just rose tinted glasses compared to back years ago on Twitter?
I mean, I feel like saying both is kind of a cop out, but I do kind of feel like it's both because I feel like um we do have a fondness for, a certain time period that was perhaps shorter than we think it was. There
Yeah.
have been incentives for people to be outraged for longer than we may think, when they post about those negative things, because the incentive structure basically started with like quote retweets. Um, that people would do, where it was all about building a following for yourself, harvesting emotional reactions to other things that other people posted. Um, and for a long time, there was nothing like a quote post mechanism on Mastodon officially. There still isn't, but you can do it through things like Ivory, because the you know stance that they had was that it was a way for people to be really negative. And as I agree that that's true, that you can definitely do that. eh, these accounts that can, pretend to be kind of activists on a topic, to harvest outrage and to build followings for themselves. I don't feel like that's good. Um, and there certainly was a ton of that on Twitter. Um, and you might even find yourself initially agreeing with somebody who's doing that. And you'd be like, oh, yeah, that's a reasonable thing this person's saying. I'm going to retweet their quote
Mm.
retweet of them being upset at this person. But, then if you step back from it, you might be like, is this a pattern where they just kind of find people to pick on and kind of do this all the time? Or they find, you know, news topics to do this with? Like, are they fundraising for themselves on the side? Like, do they have like a Patreon for themselves for their work of posting this kind of stuff? And it's just like, oh yeah, this is some of these people get pretty gross. Not everyone is doing it for those reasons. Some people just do it recreationally for the additional dopamine of
Yeah.
posting, things that people like. They're just like, oh, and I got a lot of likes from this thing. And that's why I feel like we've seen a lot of negative reactions to other social media platforms where people are moving to and not getting the interaction that they feel they deserve,
Mm. The hit,
when
the
they
dopamine hit.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's just like I don't feel like I need that, personally. Like I had stuff quote unquote go viral on Twitter a couple of times. And it was like some funny comment that I had made. Well, not funny, but just like funny enough that it did okay. But
Amusing.
it's yeah, a mild applause. But it isn't the kind of thing where I'm like, "Oh, well, I missed that, so something's wrong with Mastodon because I need to have more of that stuff happening." And it's like, "No, I don't. I'm fine not having that happening." Because another thing I think people have rose-tinted glasses about is that when you had something that would spread around to people outside of your group, to be the quote unquote viral or whatever. Like, if it got around to a few hundred eyeballs or whatever, like you would have a lot of interactions with people you didn't want to talk to, who
Yeah.
would just be showing up to reply to anything that was popular. And I feel like that is a pattern that Threads has really leaned into. Whenever I've gone on there, you can see any of the popular posts that they put in the algorithmic timeline. You can tap on and look underneath, and you'll see just the worst replies to some of these things. And it's like, I
Yeah.
wouldn't want this kind of interaction on any of my Mastodon posts. Like if I say something goofy and, you know, it gets 2 likes, I would much rather have that than, like, say something goofy, and then there's, like, 10 people telling me that I said the joke wrong. Like, I don't need that. Um, so and that happened on Twitter. It was one of the things that Threads has copied, I guess, is just that you could if your post got out there, like, you would just get interactions from people you didn't wanna talk to. And so I don't envy that or miss it, from Twitter.
No, that's true. I remember, and this is probably the first time I just started to wonder whether the Twitter was a good thing. Was was when there was a woman. I can't, the name escapes me. John Ronson, the writer and broadcaster in the UK, he did a book about her and several other people like her, who she was getting on a plane to Africa, and she made a joke about, yes, you're nodding, so you know this
Yeah.
one. So for listeners, this woman made a joke saying heading to I think it was Nigeria or somewhere. She said, "Oh, I'm heading to Nigeria. Hope I don't get AIDS. Only joking. I'm white." A very poor, quality joke, poor taste, without a doubt. But then she got on this plane, turned off her phone, obviously, and someone found her tweet. She was not famous, and retweeted it, and then everyone piled on, and there was people tracking her airplane about when it was going to land. Some people were going to turn up at the airport and take pictures of her and put it on Twitter to see what she would say, and it became an absolute pile on. And no one was saying that she should have made that joke, because it was a terrible joke, but the pile on effect of that was just so overwhelming. And I remember seeing it and thinking, oh, this is not great, really.
Now there, and I know that it's difficult to feel any kind of like uh sympathy, I guess, for her. But it is, and it was terrible what she did. But the response to that is a little, it kind of like there's some of it that you're just like, okay, well that was deserved, and then there's some of it where it goes way
Yeah,
farther, and you're just like, this is, now you've gone into another area where I'm starting to feel bad about this person who did something terrible, and it's just like, let's not get there. Like we have a space that we can operate in here where she should be correctly chided for this, but we uh we don't need to go so far as to make ourselves like pity her for this, because it is, then we've gone too far, I think, as a society. And that happens a lot with these pylons that occurred on Twitter and elsewhere. And sometimes it would be way more benign than what she did. It would just be someone's opinion about something, and about like a food topic or whatever. Like,
yeah,
um, and you could really get people to like obliterate them. And let's not forget, Twitter is a place where people were able to create accounts so that they could seem like they had a lot of people attacking someone. You could have an army, quote unquote, of people who were just you, that was attacking another person, and that's not healthy either. And Twitter didn't have tools for a long time, and I don't think it has right now, to combat sort of artificial engagement of people who would pile on in these situations. For not, because I think people might think like, oh well, pile-ons was all because someone did something negative. Sometimes it would be like someone who didn't do anything negative, but because of their identity, because of them being trans or some other issue surrounding their personhood, that people would decide that they would, be impolite in really extreme ways. And I don't feel like Twitter is a good place because of that, and so I don't miss that. And it never happened to me, but it was a situation where I just don't think that the ability to like make a mob, artificial or not, to like rail on someone is good. Um, and I know that any attempt to control that artificially after the fact, of being like, oh, well, let's just stop that post from being seen widely, would be seen as like a free speech issue or whatever
yeah,
ridiculous thing people would say. Um, and so I don't know that there is a solution for that. If you're going to like lean into an algorithm putting out what's popular, you can't just like make it unpopular all of a sudden. It's hard to do that. Um, Whereas if you don't have algorithms, if it's all based on, something happening currently chronologically, that stuff can filter out more easily over time, because it really relies on people seeing and interacting with it in a timely manner, as opposed to something just being um, pushed out over that same amount of time based on its popularity instead of recency. Um, so I don't know if that made any sense, but I feel like chronological's a healthier environment just
Oh,
because of that.
certainly. Yeah. No, I agree. So before we finish, I'm intrigued about people's visions for the future of tech. So before we go, I was wondering, is there any area or piece of tech that gives you hope for the future?
Well, I wish you had let me know this first question sooner because I can't think of anything positive at the moment after this conversation we just had about Twitter. So man, I don't know what is positive. Uh, I guess Bluetooth keeps getting better. So, so by that logic, the later versions of Bluetooth will be even better. I don't know what else I could say. I'm looking forward to. Faster Thunderbolt 6 or something. I don't know. It's just what we have for technology. I can't be too terribly optimistic about in our current environment. That's not to say good things can't happen. It's just that I don't have any like insight into them occurring. And yeah, so I have to say that those are the things. Algorithms are bad, and Bluetooth is good. So there we go.
There we go. Yeah, yeah.
These
That
is two
sounds
things.
that's a. I think that's a good way to finish off this chat. Bluetooth good, algorithms bad. Everyone listening in tech, if you can focus appropriately in the right direction, then the world will be a better place.
Yeah. Well, watch. There's going to be some version of Bluetooth that connects to your devices based on algorithmic popularity of your connections, based instead of the connection point that you're actually currently using.
Joe, stop giving people ideas. This is not good. Well, Joe, thank you so much for taking time out to speak to me today. It's a really fun chat, and speak again soon. All the best.
Thank you, Jonathan. Bye.
And that's it for First Last Everything. Thanks again to Joe for joining me. You can find links to everything we discussed, as well as where to find Joe and me online in the show notes, where you'll also find a link to our feedback form. This is a MacStories podcast. Head to macstories.net/podcast to check out all the other shows. Thanks to the amazing Will Laporte, who does our music, and of course thanks to you for listening. I'll see you next time, where my guest will be the podcaster, writer, gamer and co-host of one of our sister podcasts, MPC, Brendan Bigley. I hope you'll join me.